Merry October, fair friends! If you are by chance watching this in future times when it is supposedly no longer October, this is lies, because technically there is no one here right now to tell you that it is not October, which is certifiably good news, because today I shall be making a suitably McGonagall new hat to wear for the circa 3 occasions I foresee myself going outside in the return of the cold days in these times of plague. Yes, I already have one of these, but it turns out I wear this stupid little hat so often, it only stands to logic that I should have one in black. I still have a bunch of material left over from my 1890s gown and Edwardian wrap cape adventures, so the hat itself will be made from this heavy black wool broadcloth, lined with some of the golden silk taffeta from the cape, and accented with some of the silk velvet from the gown. I'm thinking we may have quite the potential outfit formulating here. So I do explain how I got the pattern for this in the previous witch hat bonnet video if you need a more detailed explanation, but basically the brim is found by drawing a circle the circumference of your head, plus maybe half an inch or so just to be safe, then measuring about 2 inches out from there, or however wide you want the brim to go. The crown portion involved more geometry than my non-mathy brain could cope with, so I found a website that lets you enter the bottom circumference, which again should just be the circumference of your head plus that extra ease if you added that, as well as the height that you want the crown to be. This one is about 10 inches high if you want the reference. So I've cut out 2 brim pieces and 1 crown piece out of the wool, then another crown piece out of the taffeta lining. By the way, I haven't cut any stiffening layers for this hat because the wool broadcloth is already extremely stiff and does a good enough job at holding everything into shape. My previous hat though had a layer of tailor's canvas in the brim, crown, and ear flaps to keep everything sturdy, as the tweed I was using was a lot softer. If I were to cut both ear flap layers out of the velvet, I'd need an additional stiffening layer, which is also why I've decided to just keep the outer layer of wool instead of just more velvet. Also, if you've worked with velvet before, you will understand that you do not want any more velvet in a thing that is absolutely crucially required, especially if you have to sew it round a curve. Can't wait to get to that part, even with 1 layer. The ear flap pieces were obtained literally by tracing a piece of paper around my ears. It wasn't posh, but it worked. I'm cutting 2 pieces out of the wool, then 2 more pieces out of the black velvet. The idea is that the outside of the ear flap will be made out of wool and the inside lined with the velvet. That way it's nice and soft against my face if I wear them down, or it gives the hat a nice little bit of pizzazz if I decide to tie them up. Pro tip for any of you who perhaps may aspire to work with velvet one day. So one thing I failed to explain in the video in which I spent like the entire video working with velvet is that velvet has a pile. I did explain that. But basically it has those little floofy things that either lay up or down. You know how when you run your hand over velvet, either it's very smooth or it's very rough? So when those floofs are laying downwards, your velvet is going to be very shiny, as you can see sort of happening right here. It's going to have that sheen to it. However, if you put it the other way up, where the floofs are sort of pointing upwards, your velvet is going to be very, very dark and very matte, because if you think about it like physics-wise, when the light hits the velvet, if the silk fibers are laying downwards, the light's just going to reflect off of the silk and it's going to be shiny. However, if the floofs are upward, the light just sort of gets trapped within the floof, and that absorbs the light and it absorbs the color, and it just gives the velvet a really deep, rich tone. So personally, I like the velvet to be very dark and very matte. I don't really want it to have this sheen to it. So when the ear flaps are tied up on top of the hat, that's when the velvet will be seen. So I have cut the floof so that it is going this way, and when these ear flaps are tied up on top of the head, you will see the nice, very flat, matte velvet. When they are downwards like this, shiny side out, they will be against my face. So it will be nice and soft against my face if I'm wearing the hat like that, or it will be very nice and mysterious when it's tied upwards like that. So now we can start pinning things together in preparation for sewing. But before I pin the ear flap pieces together, I'm just cutting a length of about 12 inches of some velvet ribbon, since this will need to be trapped in that seam down at the bottom to secure it. normally with spongy wools like this, I would have gone over my chalk marks with long basting stitches to thread mark those lines into place, since the chalk really does rub off at the slightest touch. But I opted not to do this for this project since I pretty much made this over the course of 2 days. The pieces weren't going to be sitting around that long, and I didn't have to do any preparation to the pieces before putting them together and stitching. So this isn't ideal practice, but hey, not all internet sewing people are perfect all the time. Once everything is stitched, I can go ahead and get all my pieces pressed. Due to aforementioned standing velvet floofs, I can't press this flat onto the ironing board or I will crush that pile and make crushed velvet, which we 0 out of 10 do not want. So I'm pressing the velvet side down onto a needle board, which I should note I didn't do this on the 1890s gown since I couldn't be certain that needle boards were used in the 1890s. I had read in what I believe was Agnes Walker a description for ironing velvet involving obtaining another human to hold the fabric taut in free space so the iron didn't crush the other side, or using a piece of velvet underneath, which I ended up doing. But this project isn't exactly trying to be historically accurate to any specific period, so needleboard it is. The next step is to put a row of top stitching around the edges of the brim, as well as both the ear flaps at roughly 3/8 of an inch in from the edge. The crown lining is then pinned inside the crown, and this piece is then pinned into the brim, leaving the taffeta lining layer free. I ended up having to snip into the seam allowance of my brim piece to get it to stretch and fit smoothly around that crown piece. Once the brim and crown pieces are connected, I then put the hat onto my head at the angle I plan to wear it so that I can pin the ear flaps into place. This angle of the ear flap setting will change based on the position of your ears in relation to the angle of the hat, so I would recommend at least getting an idea of the placement this way before matching and evening them up back on the table. I've personally decided to backstitch these flaps on by hand because things were just getting real thick by this point and I couldn't be bothered shoving all of this under a machine. To finish off the base of the hat now, I can take that edge of the lining that we left free earlier, fold that raw edge in, and pin it down at the seam allowance of the wool layer. This is then, of course, felled into place by hand with a bit of black silk thread. Okay, the hat is complete. It is now time for trimming, and whereas initially my plan was to trim the hat with this gorgeous Makuba ribbon, unfortunately it is slightly too wide, and as this is a severely tapered crown here, this is not going to lay smoothly around the crown. I don't know if you can see, but it's going to end up with a little bit of gapping up here, and I don't think I can be bothered to do all sorts of easing wizardry to get that to look relatively decent. So I have also this very, very fine black velvet ribbon, which I'm actually kind of leaning towards. It's very subdued. And lo, I have one whole new winter hat. I may or may not have a play around with some additional colorful trimming for this to suit any particular outfit in future, but for now I am rather enjoying the simple, understated, everyday witchery at work here. Perfect for going on a stroll to absolutely nowhere and meeting up with absolutely no one, for these times of pestilence continue to pervade our lands, but it is okay because we are all comfortably insane now. And thus there is no better excuse to embark upon a virtual crusade to make witch hats into fashion. We ride at dawn, friends.